COPs, because that was one of the first mechanisms that they attempted to circumvent Tabor with COPs. That's the certificates of participation is a clear and simple circumvention of Tabor. We had multiple lawsuits. That was the first time that the Supreme Court ever said that the word shall, as written in the Tabor Amendment, can mean may. That shall means may. Well, when you can invert language like that, it's pretty hard. It's pretty hard to. And the only way to do that is if the state Supreme Court is willing to pervert the meaning of the word shall into may. When Tabor said you shall not accrue multiple year debt, which is what they effectively do, certificates of participation, is they accrue debt through multiple years in order to circumvent that clause. You have one mechanism left, and that's hardball politics at that point, until you can either turn over the legislature enough. There's something that's coming that's going to affect judicial appointments, and I can't talk about it yet, but there's something that's coming here. You'll know it when you see it. That's going to take care of some of these problems with judicial appointments that result in these terrible decisions on things like COPs. In the meantime, your best effort is to turn over the local boards and councils to the maximum extent so that they don't do things like that, as well as your state senate and representatives in the districts. And play hardball politics. You have to stay in their face. You have to, and you just have to shame them at this point when they found these circumventions until we can get a turnover a large enough number of the body. But the primary thing is you got to find the right candidates. You got to get them into office, and this is the problem. We first have to have an educated electorate, so they can educate and can generate candidates that are educated in order to go on to the boards, the commissions, and the councils, and so forth, into the assemblies and bodies, and stop allowing things like circumventions of Tabor to take place on those boards. Okay. And questions like this, we can go through. Like I said, try and hold your questions down. We get to the main body and we hit the break points, then we can talk about the questions. The place I always start, and I know that groups like this usually are a heck of a lot better educated than typical groups, especially if they're Republican groups only. Because in Republican groups only, many times you have Republicans in name only in a large number of the crowd. But I usually start with, it's always good to refresh, because I think this is one of the hardest things I have, going state to state to state. And when people finally get this, even ones that are, they feel themselves are very familiar with it, a lot of times it's a little bit, it shakes them up when they realize just how constrained that more than a century of propaganda has made the American public in understanding how the republic works and how it's supposed to operate and who you are as a citizen and what that means. So I always start with the ordering of freedom and liberty to get people to as we get in, and to make the connection all the way through when we get up to the issue of state powers and nullification and what is jurisdiction and what is, to get people to understand so that it comes from inside you. Okay? Because if you don't fully integrate these principles, you know, I can go anywhere and talk to groups like this, and the ones that have integrated and incorporated the principles, we don't even have to talk to know that we're on exactly the same page. People have the ideas embodied in themselves to such a degree you know that on any subject you talk about or any issue that comes up, you'll be on exactly the same page with that person who has integrated the principles of this, of the Declaration, understands how those were organized and framed into the Constitution, and how they are supposed to work in an operating republic. There's no question. You don't even have, see, this is the problem that liberals have, really, ultimately, and why we're going to win. This is why we're going to win. Because they can't do that. They have to babble incessantly at each other about everything because they have no principles. They don't even know, they first have to figure out what planet they're all on in order to be able to converse. And then all of the ideas that they exchange are not concrete ideas, they're abstract ideas. Right? Because they have no foundation for them. They're not rooted to anything. They have no basis in understanding or common understanding. Because they can't have. Because they're not principled, and they're not universal. Okay, now it doesn't like me. So we get to this question of, first let's talk about what is a nation? And you just ask yourselves these questions. What if your nation was one of the most prosperous in the community of prosperous nations? What if your nation enjoyed true free trade, low regulation, unemployment, and the highest standard of living from a free, independent market economy and a banking system? What if your nation's population made the laws that determine how the population conducts itself beyond the minimum restrictions of the federal Constitution? And what if your nation's population saw themselves as specific inheritors of a unique and flourishing cultural heritage? What if your nation was Colorado? I'm in Idaho. I lived here for 26 years, but I learned the place, no matter where I traveled in the world. Oh, I forgot to throw up that picture there. That was one of the things I was going to throw up. No matter where I traveled in the world, the center of the universe for me, as I say in the book, has always been Idaho. When I moved here to run my business, I knew that I was always moving back to Idaho, no doubt about it. That was the center. I love Colorado. Colorado's a great place. But just like a Frenchman away from France, I don't know if that's a good example. Idaho, just like a Belgian away from Belgium, right? Idaho, I feel the same way about Idaho. Idaho is where I feel completely, totally, utterly at home, even though I wasn't even born there. I don't know why. It just is. Like I said, I love Colorado. I have covered this state, north, south, east, and west, hunting, fishing, backpacking, hiking, horse packing. It didn't matter. I've covered this state pretty well, from the San Juans all the way through the flat tops, all of it. I love this place. But it's not Idaho. But if you're a Coloradan, if I had to choose second, it'd be Colorado. But if you're a Coloradan, this is your country. Idaho is my country. That's the way you have to think. You know, I get in front of a lot of conservative groups and how many people in the room have ever read the federal Constitution? All the hands go up. No, I'm not asking this group. That's what I asked the last group, right? How many people have ever, how many people love and believe and have read the Constitution of the United States? Every hand goes up. How many have read it in the last 5 years? 4 years? 3 years? 2 years? How many people read it every day? Maybe there's a couple of hands standing in the, left and not, like I said, I'm sure in this room we've had a lot more. But in the typical Republican or conservative, a lot of times, especially, just a few years ago, maybe there's 1 or 2 hands left up in the whole room. And then I ask them the killer question. How many people in this room have ever read their state constitution? Again, I'm not talking about this room. I know what I'm going to get in this room, okay? But understand, and I said, that's the most important one. That is the most, it was the states that created the union. It's the states that control the federal government. The federal government is an agent government. There is no such thing as a legal nation called the United States. And I noticed when the gentleman changed the pledge around a little, right? That issue started to surface a bit. Well, that's part of the problem, right? Is this problem we have with understanding what our nation is. Our nation is where our actual personal jurisdiction is. And for all of us, it's Idaho or Colorado or Montana. When I threw this slide up, and of course in Montana, I had Montana in there, right? And boy, did they get it. They stood up and they did a standing ovation for themselves. Yes, we are Montanans first. And I said, you know what? That is the most gratifying thing I've seen happen in decades. And this is why I'm so much more optimistic about what the outcome is going to be here. Because that is what is important. Their nation was Montana. They understood. What the problem is they've spent a century trying to propagandize and virtually breed out the understanding that you are a citizen of Colorado or Idaho or Montana first, and an American, the abstract notion of the American principles, the e pluribus unum, based on principles, not the legal nation. There is no legal nation of the United States. There's no such thing. There's no top-down organization. There's 50 independent, free and independent states with their own constitutions, just like France or Belgium or Ireland or whatever, right, in the European Union. And I ask people all the time, especially when the issue about transfer of public lands comes up. You're the public lands, Linda, you're the public lands coordinator.
Transfer public lands, yeah, I don't know, anyway.
Okay, when that issue comes up, and I said, do you think that that the French traded a single acre of their national lands in France when they joined the EU? Do you think they gave up their forest lands, their park lands, or a single acre of their land to the EU when they entered the EU? Hell no, they're more sovereign than we are. They didn't give up a single acre when they entered the European Union, or control of that acreage, of any kind. How did that happen here? How does it continue to happen here? But it's this idea of what your country is and what a nation is in the Union, the Republic of States. What is it, actually? Oh, that works. So what are the requirements? Oh, wait, before I want to jump past, I'm going to jump down here, because I want to get to the ordering of liberty. We're going to come back to this later on, when we get to talking about sovereignty and powers and all that. So what is this idea of the flow down of power? And I don't know how many controversial things I'm going to say to this group today, but this usually seems to be one of them, depending on the makeup of the group. The way this country is organized, there's two methods to get to the Declaration, okay? Through universal origin. How did we get here? How did we get these endowed rights? Okay? Well, if you're spiritually, theologically minded, we get here through God and the Bible, which is true for those that believe in God and the Bible. But for those that think that the universe is based on scientific principles, we get here through the cosmological path. Okay, we're here because of a set of laws and principles that operate independently of intelligent creation, what they believe. Or we get here through the laws that are given by the Creator himself to the universe. Either way, though, we get to the individual. Now, in the observable universe, this is the key thing. And when it comes to governance, this is the key thing. It doesn't matter, and we could argue for the next 500 years, and probably will, as to what the true nature and origin of the universe is. You know, you're not likely to empirically, or once and for all, prove it to one side or the other for maybe that long. Who knows? Or we might find out tomorrow, one way or the other. We don't know. But we do know that an individual on this planet has what it took almost 2,000 years to get to as a single line. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Self-evident. Okay? And then discuss what the self-evident truths are. The common principles, the things that exist regardless of your opinions, your beliefs, or your understandings, the things that you can absolutely say is true between any two individuals anywhere on the planet as to who and what we are as people. Those are the self-evident principles that exist in the universe as it is. Regardless of how it got here, they still exist. Okay? No matter what your belief, they still exist as common between us. And that's why, whether I'm a Christian or a non-Christian, I can love my Christian or my non-Christian brother or sister in exactly the same way when it comes to self-governance. And why I can tolerate. And why? Because I understand them as they understand me when it comes to self-governance. And I have to respect that, regardless of their belief system. And that's why Jefferson said, right, I care not whether my neighbor has one God or 20, as long as he neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg. Okay, that's what he's talking about. That the things that are true and common in that are made in the Declaration, the natural law declaration, is how we can govern ourselves on earth and in the universe, no matter how far or wide we eventually manage to spread ourselves or not. And whether eventually we can prove absolutely or non-absolutely or whatever, whether the universe has a cosmological or a theological origin. It's still just here, and it's self-evident what we can believe and what we can understand about each other and how to rule and govern. The two things that I found in my experience in the last 30 years that cause the biggest problems in politicians, elected officials, the average citizen, and the neighbors and family that you talk to every day and try to explain these ideas, is they have no basic integrated understanding of natural law, and they don't understand economics, which are the two primary things that flow out of a natural law declaration like the Declaration of Independence. That's the two primary things that flow out. Once you get to the natural, from the individual, and what was the only thing that changed between prior to the Declaration in the understanding? There was one more, there was something else between here and here, and what was it? Between the origin and the individual. Who was the flow down of power that existed above you?
Well, the rights come from God, not the king.
The king. That was the only thing that changed with America, is there's no longer a king sitting between you and divine right. Divine right belongs to you as the sovereign citizen. I love the way that they've destroyed the term sovereign citizen to be something evil and destructive in this society, and to point out that anybody who claims themselves a sovereign citizen is somehow dangerous. Every person in this country is a sovereign citizen, for crying out loud. Every person. And they've made that, just like they made the Constitution a dirty word. It's dangerous to be a constitutionalist. You're an extremist. You're an extremist to be a sovereign citizen. When every citizen is a sovereign citizen, so everybody said, well, that's my answer, everybody. So we're all extremists. We're all sovereign citizens. This is just, I mean, the silliness that's gotten involved here is just amazing to me. Never ceases to be amazing. So in the flow down of power, right, you're moving right down, you get to the natural law declaration. Where do they lead? Where does the Declaration lead? Declaration leads straight to the creation of the states. And this is not only how it happens in the flow down of power. Isn't it coincidental that this is the way it happened chronologically? Okay? How we got to these things? We didn't get to the state constitutions. We didn't have states until we had a natural law declaration that framed what the flow down of power is. So we get to this, and so when we get to the state constitution, then of course the state has its own, its own employees and workers and elected officials, right, sitting over the side. But the understanding of those things, before I move on, the understanding of how money and economy works and how rights, responsibilities, and accountability works under natural law and the Declaration, along with the understanding of what for most people, what a citizen in a republic is, that's one of the biggest problems we have facing us. Is both the apathy, the complacency, and just the total ignorance of the average Joe Blow or Jane you're going to run across in society. Has no clue as to what you're talking about when you start raising these issues, and therefore, guess what? They can't make informed decisions at the ballot box. They don't understand when they have a good or a bad candidate standing in front of them, because it's all abstract. Oh, I like him. He's a nice guy. I'll vote for him. Okay. He sounds very pleasant. He'll probably do good in office. He speaks really well. You know, and of course, and why people like Douglas Bruce is totally loathed, because he has no social graces whatsoever, and his mother once told me, right, she raised an entirely socially retarded son. Her exact words. And she was extremely sorry about that. But you know what? like I said, I consider him a Colorado state treasurer. And